Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
My name is Dean. I'm a person in long-term recovery from addiction, and this is Inside Addiction. I want to welcome my guest today, Jay, to the show. Jay, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Going on 6 years of long-term sustained recovery. First and foremost, that's what's up.
Thank you.
How was it growing up for you, Jay?
Well, initially, it was paradise for me. My mother and father were married. I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Very popular on the block that we lived on in Manhattan. We had family night where we would discuss any of the problems. We went to a lot of different venues. We went to concerts. Back then they had the Vietnam War going on, and Marvin Gaye had written a song, What's Going On? And there was I remember it vividly, we sat in the auditorium and they showed the pictures of the little girls in Vietnam running naked that had been burned. And that was part of this show. It was on Broadway somewhere, and Marvin Gaye's song was playing. We did a lot of fun stuff like that. I had a very good childhood.
So it was a typical normal household initially?
Yeah.
Okay.
And my mother and father tried to instill values in me. They taught me to be proud of myself and taught me that I was valuable and that I was smart. And, you know, they instilled these thoughts into my head, and I just took advantage of them. But, you know, I can't, we never went hungry. There was always money to do things with. You know, when they were together, my father was a motorman in the subway system, and my mother worked at the post office. So, you know, there was 2 incomes and 2 people that had been through enough to know how to raise children. They weren't young when I was born. They were, you know, well, I wouldn't say they weren't teenagers. They were, you know, they had established careers and they were ready to settle down and have children by the time I came along. So it was very stable in my house at that time.
How was school, for example?
I was very confident in I went to kindergarten when I was like 4. So I was always around learning. I had older brothers and sisters that demanded that I do things. They didn't want me to get away with stuff. It wasn't out of love. It was out of, Jay better get up in here and do this too. So I learned pretty quickly. And by the time I was in the 1st grade, I was confident, I was tough, and I was able to keep up with all of the other kids. In fact, in most areas, I surpassed other children in the 1st grade. I came out the gate quickly.
You remember the first time that you ever used anything?
I was 8 years old, lived in the Bronx. My mother and father had divorced, and I was going back and forth from Manhattan to the Bronx. And my father lived in Manhattan, my mother lived in the Bronx, and I was with my brother. It was my birthday, my 8th birthday, and I remember standing on the staircase with him, and he never told me what we were doing. We were just there. It was me, him, and 3 of his friends, and they just started smoking, and they passed it to me, and I did what they did. You know, I puffed and inhaled. Afterwards, I don't remember feeling high. I remember acting high, but I didn't feel high. You know, I didn't feel the way that I was acting was because they were acting that way.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel anything.
So at 8 years old was the first time you were introduced to anything. It was with your brother. You were smoking weed. Did that continue at 8 years old, or was there kind of a gap? So right off the jump, you smoked weed at 8 years old, and how did it continue?
It didn't, well, the desire was already because of how everyone accepted me.
Yeah.
That was a
Part
big,
of.
Yeah, it was part of the big boys group. That was what they did, and by them doing it with me, it made me feel important. It made me feel like I had something that the kids my age didn't know about. So I continued to, whenever I got to the Bronx, my father was not allowing any of that. And I wouldn't have known how to get it in Manhattan anyway because, you know, my father didn't allow certain things around us. He was a Jehovah's Witness, and, you know, there was some strict policies that he had in his home.
Didn't fit in with smoking weed.
No, nothing. But whenever I got to the Bronx, it was just the place that we lived. It was a very loose atmosphere as far as smoking marijuana. Everybody thought that it was harmless, and it was just easy to do. Whenever my mother would give me my little 50-cent a day allowance, I would save it until I had enough money to buy. This is how ingrained from that one use, all of the things that were going on at that moment developed inside of me a desire stronger than any desire that I've ever had to get more.
So much that you're saving your allowance, 50 cents at a time.
50 cents a day till I got $3, and then I'd go buy a tray bag.
So how long did that last? Did that continue for a while, for some years?
It continued all the way through my life, and not just with marijuana. When I lived in New York, it went from smoking marijuana to, then I started to drink beer.
Now, how old were you when that kind of started?
I couldn't even tell. I don't even remember.
Shortly after 8 years old?
Shortly after. Beer, I don't like the way beer tastes. It took me so long to get that first swallow down because it's nasty. The taste is horrible. But once because I was around it so much and I saw everyone else doing it.
Again.
It was like, that's the only way to be a man. You have to drink. So I kept trying and I got it right.
So you were drinking and smoking up until what age did it continue to progress to other things?
Well, by the time I was 12, 13, I was introduced to angel dust.
At 13 years old.
Yeah, it's a big thing in the Bronx. It's a very powerful psychedelic drug that it warps reality in a way that marijuana or alcohol couldn't. It just doesn't. And it made me frightened because of the things that would happen in my mind. I was afraid I would never come back. I can recall not knowing what these are.
At 13?
At 13. I could not name these. They're fingers, but I didn't know what they were. And I'm looking at them trying to remember the name. And that's how powerful the effect was.
As powerful as the effect was and as much as it scared you? So was that like a one-time use?
No, this was something that I did continuously. There were lapses where I didn't use it for years.
Sure.
Then there was times when all of a sudden it came back into my life and I, went with it. I also experimented with blotter acid and mescaline.
How old?
Oh, between the ages of 14 till about 18. I took a large amount of that also. It affected the way that I performed in life. Things started happening to me that I wasn't prepared for, such as arrests, not being able to function in school, being ostracized by my peers because of how I acted. My maturity level was delayed because of my drug use.
So you start out using to fit in, and then it results in the opposite effect.
Absolutely.
It isolates you. You mentioned arrest. How old were you, your first police contact and the first arrest? We're talking about you started smoking weed at 8 years old. By the time you were 12, you were doing mescaline and experimenting with hallucinogenics. So how did that progress into the first point of being arrested and incarcerated?
The first real arrest that I had, it was Halloween 85 or 84. I was in the village of Wappingers Falls. We had moved out of New York City up to Wappingers Falls when I was 14. And I was taking acid again. And everyone was wearing Halloween outfits, dressed up in their costumes. And something happened where there was a verbal altercation. Somebody said something, someone else said something. Someone threw an egg at a car. The friend that I was with hits a guy with a stick, and everyone that was there jumped on my friend. So I had to save him because of this sense of loyalty that I had for a person I had just met, because we just moved up there. I didn't know, but this is my thinking. And I ended up fighting, and one of the people I was fighting was a cop. I don't know why he grabbed me. There was so many other people there, and they were trying to hurt me.
Wrong place, wrong time. It's the classic story of addiction. It wasn't my fault. What about him?
So me and the police officer ended up in a tussle, and when I realized it was a cop, I relented, and I ended up going to jail for that. I got out the same night, but that was my first time in the back of a police car.
And how old were you at that point?
I was about 15, 16. The next arrest resulted in me going to prison.
And how old were you then?
18.
18.
That is after I was introduced to crack cocaine.
So at 18 years old, introduced to crack.
I was introduced to crack at 16.
At 16. So within 2 years, you're looking at a state bid?
Mm-hmm. It was so fast that most people that you talk to that have experimented with crack cocaine, you will hear that their story ends somewhere close behind their starting of using it, because it's such a destructive drug. It dominates every area of your life. It takes everything from you. But I was able to continue to use crack cocaine from the time I was 16 until I was damn near 40.
So at 18 years old, incarcerated in state prison, safe to say that's drug related?
Yes.
And how long did you go to prison for?
I went to prison for 1.5 to 4.5 years.
Okay.
And when I got out of prison, I went back to prison for parole violations because I couldn't stay sober.
How long did it take to turn around and be rearrested and reincarcerated?
Not long. Maybe 2-3 months. I got out in, it was cold, so it must have been January. I went back to jail in like April. They let me go to a rehab, which was my first experience with AA, NA, or any type of recovery.
So you go to rehab and you get introduced to sober support networks after getting out of prison. How old were you at that point when you first kind of had, an introduction to the possibility of recovery?
I was 20 years old. It was in 1988.
Okay.
I can kind of remember that age. There was some really, really powerful people in recovery, man. They made me feel like this was possible, but I had not experienced enough of the downside to wake up.
The bottom.
Yeah, my bottom was way lower than where this particular point in my life was at. I had a wonderful girlfriend. My mother was in my corner. I had the potential to do anything that I desired to do, but deep inside of me, the only thing that I wanted to do was to use.
Just weren't ready.
I wasn't ready.
And that's at 20 years old?
That was at 20 years old.
So at 20 years old, let's move forward from 20 years old. Mm-hmm. How was life in your 20s? Periods of abstinence?
I would like to say that, but I don't. The only periods of abstinence that I had were when I was in prison or jail or when I was in a rehab.
So you went back to prison in your 20s?
I didn't go back to prison. I went to county jail. Okay. When the only prison term that I served was when I was 18.
The first one.
And I went to a bunch of different penitentiaries based on the violations that I did. And initially when I went in, because I was such a motivated person, all of these values that I was taught as a child started coming back when I had that extended period away from drug use. I was focused. I got on the outside work gang, and I worked my way back down to Fishkill, and I ended up being in work release. I was able to maintain a job and save money. And when I got out, I bought a car. And all of that was gone within a matter of 6 months after my release because I was distracted by life. I could not focus on what I was supposed to do. All of those things that I promised in letters and that I said to my mother and my girlfriend and anyone that would listen, all of those things took a back seat to what I really, really wanted to do, which was to use.
Did your addiction end at crack?
No. For a very long time, that was the primary drug of use. But there were certain things that were happening, that had happened, people that came into my life, the quality of the drug, the amount that you would get for the same price, it dried up, kind of. So people started to become addicted to pills. And it was only a matter of time before it got a hold of me because I was in that circle of people. Those are the people that I gravitated towards. If you were sober, we had nothing in common.
Yeah.
Nothing. There was nothing we could talk about. I would be uncomfortable, first of all, because when I was around someone that had their life together, it was it was like the light of everything that was wrong with me. There would be a spotlight on all of my defects.
Look what he's got that you ain't got.
Exactly. And they would not say anything like that. They weren't trying to be boastful or anything. It was how I felt inside because I knew that I should be doing better. But the addiction had me to the point where once I was out the door, I walk out my door when I get up and get dressed and walk out the door, all I was trying to do was find a way to use.
So pills progressed to anything beyond pills?
I started to use heroin.
How long do you think it took from pills to heroin?
Maybe 6 months, but then I'm still using everything else.
Yeah.
There was no limit to what I would do because I was addicted to not being sober. I was addicted to feeling some sort of high all the time.
Yeah, it was once explained, Dean, you're addicted to more.
Yeah.
That's your drug of choice, more,
Exactly.
Whatever it happens to be. Jay, at what point do you think there was a bottom that you hit? Does something stand out to you that was like, at that point, that pivotal moment where we hear people talk about and explain the process of like a spiritual awakening, or it's like getting sick and tired of being sick and tired, because you've been through some stuff.
Yeah.
So was there something in particular that you can look back on and say, hey, that was it right there?
Oh, yeah. I have about 20 or 30 bottoms.
And trap doors are a bitch.
And I found out that you hit your bottom when you stop digging. And what happened is I was standing on the corner. I had just taken something from a friend of mine who is still my best friend to this day. And I knew that I was supposed to split the money with him, but I had already messed some of the money up. So then I'm like, well, I'm not going to take this because this is all I have. That selfish, self-centered, me over you thing. And I was not really that way. I was a fair person.
Yeah.
I always tried to treat people the best I could because I thought that it was because I was a good person, but in reality, the reason that I was treating people so nice is because I would hope that they would treat me nice the next time I seen them. I was setting things up. I was playing chess in my head with people. And I was standing on that corner that day with the money in my pocket, and all of a sudden, I had this strange experience where I looked and I could visualize that I had nowhere to go. I saw who was around me and what they were doing. This guy's shooting dice. This guy's selling drugs. That he's trying to sell a gun. And I all of a sudden felt very afraid. I felt the fear that I've never felt. And I call it the cloak of invincibility that I had walked around with my whole life thinking nothing bad was going to happen to me. I got this. It was taken away. And I felt naked and alone and scared. And I just walked off the block. I have never stood on another corner since that day because I don't believe in that anymore. And one of the things that I haven't discussed was my wife. She had decided to leave a year before that moment. And she took my son and left, and she had written me and called me, and we had spent time together in between the moment she left and the moment that I had that awakening. And she had gotten her life together, and she was, asking me, when are you ready? Please, come on, I need you.
She in recovery as well?
Yeah. She has a year more than I do. It was exactly a year. We celebrate the same month. And I called her, and I told her I was ready. I needed help. And she put me on the phone with the director of the Red Door, and she told me what to do, and I did what she said. The moment that I decided that I wanted to get sober, it was not like any other time in my life that I tried to get it because my circumstances, because I hurt somebody, because my family wanted me to, because I felt
I'm doing
bad.
it for this person, I'm doing it for that reason. At this point, and we hear that when people are finally able to, get it, that light switch turns on is when they're doing it for themselves.
Yeah, it became a very different process. I remember being in the center, trying to get sober, and I'd be in the center of the chaos going on in whatever rehab or whatever halfway house. I would either be the cause or part of the cause of chaos and war stories and, girlfriends and having all of this madness in my life. And I could see it in other people, and I stayed away from it. I had to. I didn't want to go back to where I came from.
It's like quicksand.
Yeah.
Get sucked right into it.
But when you asked me earlier about when I was in the first rehab that I went to, you said, was that your bottom? And I said I hadn't experienced enough. When I was in that rehab, the first one, I would think of, listen to what people told me, and my experiences were like theirs.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anything that horrible. The only reason that I went to prison is because I got caught. But I was getting money because I was doing this, that, and the other thing. Those were my thoughts. I didn't see the destructive patterns that it caused in my life. I didn't see that I had become a liar, a cheat.
Homeless.
That I was home, well, not at 18, but not
Along the way.
Along the way after that, I experienced a whole bunch of things that pointed directly to my drug uses. If you do not stop this, if you do not cut this and everything that comes with it out of your life, there's more to come.
Well, that's that definition of insanity. Continue to do the same thing and expect a different result.
Exactly.
Let's talk about recovery. Going on 6 years.
Yes.
What helps you stay sober?
God and the program of AA.
Throughout 6 years, that's a long time.
It doesn't feel like it. It feels like every day is a new and exciting day. This is a life that I've never lived. Every day that I wake up, I'm doing stuff that I've never done. I've always been able to maintain a certain look, certain things, certain stuff. But I've never been able to do it in a sober environment and live the way that I'm living now.
In 6 years, how has your recovery been challenged? Because in 6 years, I can't imagine any emotion that a person doesn't experience. We experience the loss, whether it be the loss of a relationship, whether it be the death of someone, whether it be an expectation that wasn't met. Has your recovery been challenged? Is there anything in the past 6 years that has tested your recovery?
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't say that it's tested my recovery as much as it's tested my resolve to change. There's certain things that happen that if it had have happened to me years ago, I would have went to jail for. I would have done something violent or something to try to make it right. Recovery teaches me that I have to live a certain way. I have to have higher expectations of my conduct and decorum. I have to give an example to my children, because if they watch me doing certain things, how am I going to tell them not to? What I say is what I do. I live a life of transparency. When I tell you, you can come and pull the curtain back on my life and you'll see nothing, I mean that.
That being able to live that life of transparency and that integrity piece, doing the right thing when no one's looking.
Absolutely.
I know, some of the gifts that you've been afforded in recovery. For example, being able to be in a position to give back and help that person that's still sick and suffering in many ways. You mentioned sober support. I know in a professional capacity, and it just seems as though you've kind of dedicated your life in many ways to helping people that have been hurting, because you know that as well. A few things. I also know you have some talents that I think you're very humble about. And I want you to share a couple of the writings that you have with our viewers.
Okay.
But I also want you to tell me if there was someone that was watching. Now, this could be the loved one of someone, somebody that has a brother, sister, father, uncle, neighbor, coworker that's still sick and suffering, or someone that's actually still out there suffering. In one sentence, what would you say to that person?
Give yourself a chance. If it's one sentence, that's it.
Give yourself a chance.
Just give yourself a chance. Believe in what you see, the truth. Because we look at what we want to see sometimes, and we don't see the destruction in the drug use, and we don't see the good in those that are changed. Sometimes people that were in my life that had changed, I would call them hypocrites. You used to do this. I'm not looking at the fact that they've changed, and there's a possibility that if I use their experience or try to tap their minds, they could help me. I was looking at the fact that they didn't want to participate in the wrong, in the destructive lifestyle that I was living anymore. And the same as for the drug use, the people that were around me, they're the ones that we were all living a destructive life. People were dying or going to jail and losing stuff.
This is your camera right here, Jay, straight ahead. I've had the pleasure and opportunity of hearing you just kind of right off the cuff freestyle.
Okay.
And if you could share what you shared with me in the past.
Sure. Insanity was causing calamity. It had me looking for family to help me with the problems that's jamming me. I'm curious. It had me delirious, but then I got serious. I felt the fire, then I got furious. The ferocity was gaining velocity, and not maybe or possibly. I was doing this, and nothing was stopping me. I came to believing, and then I decided I would get in God's car and allow him to drive it. Consider it. It's just like a fit in it. Don't try to belittle it. If you listen, then you learn it's legitimate. I'm powerless. I need to acknowledge this. It doesn't show cowardice. There's simply a path. I must follow this with stability and mental agility. I'm battling misery. I'm trying to change the person I used to be. The key word is change. It's time to rearrange the way that I live, because I know I'm kind of strange. So it's about, without a doubt, me trying to reroute the direction of my life and trying to get out of the hell that I created and grew accustomed to. It can't be done alone. That's why I'm learning to use you and choose to get through all situations without falling to temptations that cause complications. And stay on the path, so don't giggle or laugh. And if you do the math, then you'll know the half. Was that all right?
Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie. Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.